Some backstory. My mother and I have never gotten along. Ever since I was little, she has gone out of her way to be very toxic, controlling, and overbearing over every aspect of my life, while giving my siblings more freedom. This amped up when my kid was born. Me is me. B, my kid. EM, entitled Mom. Like I said in my backstory, EM and I have never gotten along. She liked controlling my money, my personal life. It was awful. The fights alone were good enough to be on television, as one of those reality TV shows. I had lost good relationships with boys, even friends because of her. After B was born, her controlling ways got even worse. She butt in on my parenting, essentially taking over as B's primary caregiver and decision-maker. She told me that because I lived in her house, it was her right as the grandmother to do whatever she liked, and if I didn't like it, I could sign off my rights to B and leave. Of course, I refused to do this and stayed because I wouldn't abandon my little B. I will admit that I wasn't in the best financial position when I had B. B's father and I had broken up and forced me to move back home with EM. I hated it. Over the next couple of years, I let EM have her way, all the while working my butt off at a night job and was saving money. She stole the money I had saved up more than once, so I was forced to get a bank account. I was fine with paper checks and cashing them at our local check cashing place, up until that point. But because she kept stealing, claiming my money was her money, I had to get creative with where I hid my cash until I got the bank account. Because it was a bank-issued debit card, it requires a PIN to purchase things. I, of course, came up with a special PIN number that she would never guess. One night, I am cooking dinner for my son and EM bursts in, demanding to know where my money is. I tell her that I had set up a bank account for myself. She flipped out. She demanded to know the PIN to my debit card so she could take out the money. And I gave a big, fat no. She screamed at me for being selfish and that she deserves the money more than me because she and B live in her house, and if I wouldn't give up the PIN, then she would cut the card into ribbons so neither of us could have it. By this point, on the advice of a friend, I had begun recording EM whenever she began to misbehave for any reason. After telling EM I wouldn't give up the PIN, she grabbed the scissors and chopped my debit card into tiny pieces. I knew I could just go take out cash if I needed to, and I had discovered a convenient hiding place where I had been stashing my cash, so I wasn't worried. I requested a new card the next day and went about my business. Sometime later, when I had saved enough, I found one close to work and there was a daycare center a few blocks away, which would be perfect for B and I. I got a friend to go with me, and after a bit of talking with my new landlord, I signed the lease, paid the first 3 months of rent off, and got the keys. I was stoked, to say the least. I went to EM's house and began packing right away. She barged into my room without even knocking and asked just what the hell I was doing. Of course, I picked up my phone and began recording right away. I told her that me and B were moving out. Without any hesitation, she began screaming, demanding to know where I was taking her kid. I refused to tell her. So what does EM do? She calls the police. The police arrive, and before I had the chance to explain the situation, EM begins ranting and raving that I am kidnapping her child. Her child. The officer looks at me with suspicion, but then relaxes when I tell him B is my kid and that we are moving out. EM flips out even more, demanding the officer to arrest me and force me to sign over my parental rights to her, and to interrogate me into giving up my bank details. The officer sighed, the kind of sigh like, why the hell was he even called out to this situation? He told my mother that he could not arrest me for moving out because I'm an adult and B is my child, and he couldn't force me to sign over my parental rights, nor could he force me to give up my bank information. He then told her that if she wanted to go for grandparents' rights, she most certainly could, but given how unhinged she is just because I am moving out, it doesn't seem like she is within the right frame of mind to be anywhere near any child, let alone her own grandchild. This did not go over well at all. As the officer was leaving and I was in the process of packing up some of B's things, EM lunged at me and began scratching at my face. I naturally defended myself and shoved her away from me. She screamed at the officer to arrest me for assaulting her. The officer sighed, again, and said he had seen her lunge at me first, and me shoving her was me defending myself. He then added that someone would be going to jail tonight, and told her to put her hands behind her back. I never felt so grateful for the police in my life. I think the fact that she's losing absolute control over yours and your child's lives has caused her to completely snap, and she has absolutely no business around either one of you right now in the frame of mind she's in. I think it's time for a restraining order if you don't already have one. Part 2. While EM was being carted off to jail for a nice relaxing cool down and lockup for the evening, I took the opportunity to pack everything I could within the time I had. My siblings were understandably upset EM had been arrested, but after explaining the situation, they didn't really try to stop me either. I secured a moving van and packed everything and went to my new apartment with B. A friend helped me unpack some basic things, helped me set up B's bed, and we got some Chinese food. The feeling of relief swept over me like a tidal wave. After years of A, stealing, being controlled, and being stolen from, I was free. I don't think I ever cried so hard. I'm still in therapy. Eventually, I was unable to continue working nights because finding childcare at those hours was impossible, and almost everyone in my family had disowned me for hurting EM. I found a job that paid close to $3,000 a month, and it was above my skill level, but thankfully, it had a full training program, and I was able to afford the daycare close by and still make enough to pay the bills and have a little extra for saving and fun things for me and B to do on the weekends. While I was glad to get away from EM, B would often say he missed her and how much he liked the presents she gave him. While I didn't let B go without, he certainly wasn't getting as much as he did before. Of course, I didn't want to shatter his view of his grandmother and break his little heart, but I didn't want to lie to him either. I told him that EM was no longer in our lives because she treated me very poorly, and it had gotten to a point where I couldn't handle it anymore. B is 7 now. He understands when adults are being mean to each other. He knows EM was mean to me, but he liked that she was nice to him. He's a kid, so I won't hold that against him, even if it makes me grumble a little. Fast forward a year. I had made our apartment into a home. B's bedroom was stocked full of toys, clothes, a bed, books, and the fridge was always full. On my income, I was able to buy myself the queen bed of my dreams. I afforded us a comfortable life. While we weren't rich, we had enough money to live, and having financial stability was something I never thought I would have under EM's control. I had even started seeing a very awesome guy I had met at a luncheon my boss was throwing. We hit it off immediately, and B absolutely adores him. After having no contact with EM for the year, I was surprised to see I had a message over Facebook from one of my siblings. They asked me if I'd be willing to talk to EM and try mending the rift because she missed B and wanted to mend our broken family for B's sake. I didn't want to. I felt like this was some ploy to get her claws into B and hurt me again. Just looking at the message made me have a PTSD episode. I was scared, very scared. After my boyfriend helped me to calm down and told me that talking to my therapist might help, I called her and set up an emergency appointment. My therapist told me that EM reaching out might be sincere, and the most that will happen is the visit going bad, and I can go to no contact again. I wasn't worried about there being an argument. I was worried EM might steal, or worse, kidnap B if I turned my back. My paranoia was all over the place. After thinking it over for a while, I decided not to let fear control me. I messaged my sibling back, and we made plans to meet up in a public place for lunch. I agreed to bring B with me, but I made the condition that my boyfriend would join us as well. My sibling wasn't happy with this, but hesitantly agreed. Red flag number 1. As the day of the lunch approached, EM sent a message to me on Facebook saying how much she missed B and that she had loads of presents for him. I said I am sure he will be very grateful for the gifts, and EM said she had one for me too. To avoid an argument, I thanked her and told her I would see her at the lunch. She assured me I would be shocked when I opened my present with a devil grin emoji. Red flag number 2. On the day of the lunch, my anxiety was shooting through the roof. I kept changing my mind, but my boyfriend assured me he would be there for me every step of the way, and if I was uncomfortable and wanted to leave, he would grab B and get the duck out of there. After some more freaking out, we got into the car and arrived at the restaurant. My boyfriend was kind enough to offer to pay for everyone's lunch, and EM took full advantage, ordering the most expensive thing on the menu, including an expensive cocktail and even an extra dish to take home for later. I was understandably annoyed at this, but my boyfriend simply smiled and said whatever EM wanted. After we ate, B and EM hugged, and B opened all the gifts she had gotten for him. He was super happy and excited to take everything home to play with him, but EM stopped him and said that the toys would be for her house and that B was welcome to come play with them whenever he wanted. I nearly spat out my drink. This got EM's attention, and she smiled at me. That smile was faker than fake, and said she wanted to hand-deliver my gift in person. She handed me a large brown envelope. I almost didn't want to take it, worried she had put anthrax or something in it, but I took it and opened it. She was petitioning the court for grandparents' rights. I immediately exploded, standing and throwing the papers at her, shouting at her that she will never get her hands on B, and she would over my dead and rotting corpse. I grabbed B, my boyfriend, and we immediately left. B was sad he couldn't keep the gifts, but I promised to buy all of them for him myself, and we didn't need EM in our lives. I felt humiliated and tricked. The only good thing to come out of this horrible episode is that they were left with the bill. I get the sense that your therapist doesn't really understand that some people don't deserve second chances. Why would anyone tell a patient that if meeting up with their A goes badly, they can just go no contact again? Is your therapist unable to grasp that there'd be emotional fallout from a meeting gone bad? Or is it ambivalence along the lines of, meh, if it damages the patient, we can work it out in more therapy? Depending on where you are, grandparents' rights are a lot harder to get than these parents think. Most places need you to show that the child would be unduly harmed by the removal of the grandparent's presence, or even if it's often supervised visitation, which I doubt she would be grateful or cool about. Part 3. In the last entry, EM was petitioning for grandparents' rights. I had never been involved with the courts before. I was pretty freaked out, not to mention terrified of the lies EM might tell them about me. After some talk with my boyfriend and therapist, they urged me to hire an attorney. I found a fantastic family law attorney who was incredibly kind, but very direct and didn't BS me. I still had flash drives of recordings of the times my mother aided me, a lot of the arguments we had, but my attorney dashed any hope of using them. Audio recordings weren't admissible unless both parties agreed to be recorded. I almost gave up hope on the spot, but he assured me that my EM's previous arrest and the testimony of the officer who had arrested her the night I moved out, plus my boyfriend's witness statement, and the fact that EM hadn't seen B in over a year was more than enough for a judge to deny EM of any grandparent rights. At the hearing, in classic Karen form, EM played the victim, stating that I was the aggressor the night I moved out, that I smoked W around B, and I was a lady of the night who brought strange men into her home and slept with them in front of B. She came up with so many lies during the hearing that I swear crap was about to start spewing from the browns of her eyes. She even went so far as to accuse my boyfriend of B. The judge then asked if she had any proof of these claims, and she looked at me with that fake motherly tone, saying she didn't want to ruin her precious daughter's life, but this whole thing has forced her hand, and she is looking out for her grandchild's best interest. I couldn't contain the snort that I audibly let out. After my siblings testified, they merely repeated the lies, but couldn't provide any proof. The judge dismissed her testimony as hearsay, but did order me to undergo a D test. When it was my turn to testify, I detailed the years of A in theft. I told the judge about the money that EM had stolen from me many times, and the time she cut my debit card because I wouldn't give her my PIN number. I even reiterated about how she demanded the cop arrest me and to force me to give up my bank details. When I stepped down from the stand, the officer was called in to testify. EM turned white as a ghost. The officer corroborated my story. EM began shouting at the officer, calling him a liar, but the judge had the police report in front of him. He warned EM he would hold her in contempt of court if she continued with her outburst. My therapist and my boyfriend also testified. The judge denied EM's petition for grandparents' rights. He even said he believed she was in deep need of counseling and that she displays instability to the point it is disturbing. EM was shaking with rage. She held her composure, shockingly, and just walked out of the courtroom, glaring at me as she passed by. Outside the courtroom, I told my siblings that I will never let EM into my life or B's life after this, and if they continue to side with her, then they too will have to accept that I will have no contact with them. My boyfriend, who I married, and I agreed to try putting EM and that side of the family behind us. because I had no family who cared. Our wedding was small, only his side in attendance. I didn't mind. His family had welcomed B and I openly and accepted us. We moved into a larger home just a few miles away from my old one and agreed we wanted to start a family together and gave B a little sibling. If there is one thing that helped me get through the years of torture, it was being a mom, and I'm really good at it. Husband even legally adopted B to claim as his own. You'd think this would be a happy ending, but nope. The B is like herpes. She keeps coming back.